You can take yourself to work here. Very good. Yeah, fine, yeah. Fine. Fine, yeah, no problem. Just take it as it comes now.
Good morning, and thank you for starting your day with us. And welcome to an event organised by Liquid Gas Europe in partnership with Euractiv. I'm Rome Ziding. I'll be moderating today's debate on rural futures, ensuring the Energy Performance Building Directive, the EPBD, leaves no one behind. A big thank you, of course, to everyone who is joining us online. And a reminder, if you have a comment or a question, do put it into our chat page along with the name of the panelist it's directed at, and we'll be picking out your questions during this debate. So do get involved starting from now. Now, Russia's war on Ukraine has, amongst other things, set off a global energy crisis, pushing all of our household bills up, heightening the threat of energy poverty for so many. Now, the bloc is acting fast to outpace the fallout from this crisis, especially when it comes to energy. Initiatives such as REPowerEU look to chart a path to phase out dependency on Russian fossil fuels and also to transform Europe's energy system. Now, the revision of the EPBD could be a powerful tool for the European Commission to help reduce dependency and overall EU emissions by 55% by that key target date of 2030. Buildings, if you didn't know it, they are the single largest energy consumer in Europe, but 75% are actually inefficient. But one major demographic in this is also being overlooked. The 130 million Europeans that actually make up our rural communities. Now, according to the OECD, rural areas are crucial for the green transition. They cover around 80% of OECD country territories. A European example is Latvia, where 50% of its population lives in rural areas. So with so much untapped potential for fighting climate change, could the smart redesign of rural buildings have a transformational impact on addressing climate change and the circular economy for member states? And how then can we empower these local communities, the entrepreneurs, the businesses, the local associations, the local governments to be the drivers for sustainability? Well, let's ask the experts. Okay, joining me for this debate are Stefan Moser. He's head of Unit B3, Products and Buildings at DG ENER at the European Commission. We also have EPP Irish MEP Sean Kelly, who is Shadow Rapporteur on the EPBD revision at the European Parliament. We do now have Seamus Boland. Good morning. He's the CEO of Irish Rural Link and President of EESC Diversity Europe. And we also have Eva Ebramiuk-Lette. She's General Manager of Liquid Gas Europe. Good morning and welcome to you all. Right, so to understand a little bit about each panelist, I'll now give them the floor for a few minutes to introduce themselves. And let's go in order of introduction. Let's start with the European Commission and with Stefan Moser. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thanks a lot, Mariam. And I'm very happy to be with you here at this very interesting event. Indeed, I'm Stefan Moser, working in DG Energy on buildings and products, and as you said, the rural transition is very much at the center of the Green Deal in various aspects, and I'm therefore very happy to be here and discuss with you how to address the challenges there.
Okay, short and sweet. Thank you so much. Over to our MEP, Sean Kelly. Good morning.
Good morning, Sean Kelly, MEP for Ireland South, leader of Fine Gael in the European Parliament in the EPP group. I was a rapporteur for the energy performance of buildings before Christmas, and now that was the assessment of what went on before. And now I am the rapporteur for the EPP on the EPBD as well. So kept nice and busy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, over now to Seamus Boland. We hope that your sound is working, that we can hear you. Please go ahead. Unfortunately, Seamus, I think you are muted. So we'll let the technical team, who obviously the people behind the scenes, so no one else can see, to help you unlock your sound. And so we'll go to Eva. Please go ahead.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today, this morning, to discuss this topic. I represent Liquid Gas Europe, which is an European association of LPG distributors, but also we represent other gaseous fuels, including bio-LPG, renewable LPG, RDME, and other fuels which can be put into the current infrastructure. Just perhaps I have a little bit time, then maybe I can just quickly kick off why we are here today, and why Liquid Gas Europe is behind this event as well. Well, 40 million homes in the EU are not connected to the gas grid, and in those areas, the current fuel mix is still dominated by the usage of heating oil and coal. And we believe that the revision of Energy Performance of Buildings Directive opens an opportunity for policymakers to set up a pathway for cleaner and more efficient buildings in Europe. And the rural and off-grid building stock should be looked at particularly closely due to their reliance on heating oil and coal, and also because nearly 25% of people in rural areas are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. Liquid gases such as LPG, bio and renewable LPG or RDME are used in off-grid areas for heating, in industrial applications and for cooking. And liquid gases offer environmental benefits such as lower greenhouse gas emissions and also less air pollution in comparison to heating oil and coal. At the same time, they are a cost-effective option for consumers facing those financial difficulties because they don't require expensive storage facilities and they can be transported easily at ambient temperatures. They also act as renewable liquid gases, actually act as a drop-in replacement for traditional fossil LPG and removing the need for new and expensive infrastructures. Sorry, I've heard some disturbance on the call. Maybe just to continue, but our analysis suggests that by 2050, our industry LPG industry can become 100% renewable, and in recent years we have witnessed a lot of new investments into the renewable fuels as well. And it is very important to be aware that a significant number of European citizens live in very old rural buildings, which are very often hard to treat, hard to electrify, and many of the citizens do not have the financial means to invest in extensive renovation or expensive technologies. That's why we need alternatives like drop-in renewable liquid gases so that all citizens can join the transition and decarbonize in an affordable way. And we actually will be presenting more details of the options for rural areas in our joint publication together with the European Biogas Association, which will be available later this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. I like to said that, LPG hopefully could become 100% renewable, but also on a personal note, I mean, I've grown up in the countryside, and I know very well that, you know, we don't have a main gas connection, and I grew up having a coal shed in my house, and then eventually, years later, we switched over to oil central heating. So, you know, helping the countryside and helping the people there with their energy demands and to get, you know, their energy costs down would be great. Let's now go to Seamus Boland. Please do take the floor for your opening statement, please.
Hello?
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, sorry, because I thought, okay, as I was saying earlier, I'm working with Irish Rural Link in Ireland and the European Economic Social Committee, of which I'm president of Group 3. The main problems facing rural communities, not just in Ireland, but across Europe, are really divided in two places. First of all, the supply of energy and home heating. In rural areas, that tends to be often dependent on fossil fuels and is independent of systems which you would have in urban areas. The second big issue for households and people living in rural areas across Europe and in Ireland is transport. There is a massive reliance on the car and the heavy types of transport in order to move people and goods. The problems related to that are still unsolved in terms of alternatives to fossil fuel, to oil and other substances. So we are dependent completely on the fossil fuel, which means that the electricity or the electric vehicles certainly are proving very difficultly, mainly because of anxiety in terms of range and charging apparatus. I wrote a report as a rapporteur in the European Economic Social Committee, pointing out the huge weaknesses there are in terms of providing charging facilities, and also because of the isolation. This means that we do not have the reliance on electric, so we are totally dependent on the fossil fuel supply of fuel. And finally, just as this is a brief introduction, Irish Rural Link have been working with rural communities in Ireland, bringing them in terms of education and information to a point where they can at least make choices. There are alternatives and there are other ways of doing things like retrofit, like maybe solar power, but these are still a little bit of a distance off. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Okay, thank you so much, Seamus. And I think, you know, my sort of big takeaway from what you said there is that it's about changing perspectives, and especially with regards to transport. You know, there's perhaps not enough public transport links in rural communities. That's something that we can pick up on a little bit later. Okay, well then, you know, now that you've all introduced yourselves, let's actually kick off this debate. So I want to start with a bit of a scene setter. And we'll start again in order of introduction. So we start with Stefan. Have rural communities been forgotten? If so, how far behind are they in terms of decarbonisation and sustainability in comparison then with major cities or capitals?
Thanks a lot, Mariam. So I think the answer is that they need help, they need support, they need advice how to be successful in the green transition, also and respecting their special needs and what actually would be cost effective. The transition which we are all facing now accelerated because of the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the need to have also energy security much more in our minds, does not mean that basically everyone has to electrify, that there won't be any gaseous or liquid fuels anymore in the future. I think it requires a territorial analysis of each member state. What are the respective advantages and disadvantages of the gases and the electricity, liquid fuels which we have, the objective of the Green Deal, also of the revision of the EPBD, but also increasing renewable energy is to save energy where we can. So to see what is the potential of, in the case of rural communities, to reduce their energy needs by of course, increasing the performance of the building in a way which is also cost effective and makes sense. Looking at the facade, of course, respecting also the cultural heritage, but then also see what is the appropriate energy. May include, of course, solar power, which does not require basically a connection to the grid. You can store the energy at the place of consumption, so even in very remote areas. And of course, gaseous and liquid fuels of renewable origin, or solid fuels of renewable origin. So this is, we will, unfortunately, because of the Russian aggression and against Ukraine and the political decisions in relation to phasing out fossil fuels much more quickly than we would have envisaged under the Green Deal, notably in relation to gas as being a transition fuel. We have to look for alternatives and prioritize even more strongly the less abundant renewable gases, such as biogas, to where it's most needed. And I think the off-grid solutions, which renewable gas offers, they are very precious, but they should also be then reserved for where they make most sense, which is in rural communities, for instance. And of course, what else is available can be used for the areas in a member state, including urban areas where there are several alternatives. The most important alternative for urban areas where there's a strong grid, where basically there are lots of possibilities to bring together buildings in neighborhood solutions, district solutions. There's of course electrification of heating and cooling with heat pumps, but also district heating in various ways, including geothermal. These things are very difficult to establish. I fully agree in rural areas, and therefore I think the solutions which Eva outlined at the beginning would absolutely work with renewable sources, and also what Seamus said. This would not change would not require a major change in lifestyle, but of rather origin of the fuel. So not to have fossil sources anymore, but renewable sources. But otherwise, I think the impact could be relatively limited. Of course, help will always be will have to be given to rural communities. Advice what makes most sense. Is there another solution, for instance, in a village which is maybe linked to the grid, where then also electrification can, of course, take place of heating and cooling? What makes sense for individual buildings in view of the cultural heritage? What are the technical solutions to reduce the energy consumption, which is always necessary, even if otherwise you do not change fundamentally the type of heating. Energy consumption, getting it down is the task for every one of us. It's the cheapest fuel. Not to use energy, but there will always be residual energy needs, and that's what we have to work on, what makes most sense and requires a strategic approach across the member state territory.
Okay, so we'll definitely come back to member states and their fossil fuels use, something that we spoke about just before the debate kicked off. So there you were saying there about lots of possibilities, but connection being the issue in rural areas. MEP Sean Kelly, what's your take? What's the problem then, or the biggest sort of problems for these rural communities?
Well, I think, as you pointed out, we have 75% of buildings inefficient, so there's a huge job to be done. And the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive is the main legal instrument to do that at EU level. So ensuring the success of the renovation wave will essentially come through 5 factors, all interlinking. 1, the money to pay for renovations. It has been said that 25% in rural areas are at risk of poverty. So that's a question. Then the workers to do the work properly. That's another issue. Then the supply of materials, and then an overarching secure regulatory framework to incentivise building owners to undertake the innovations in decarbonisation of the energy system. In the majority of cases, electrification at individual level and the district heating from renewable sources will be the most beneficial option, taking into account efficiency, reliability and cost. However, as has been pointed out, the built environment varies greatly all across the European Union, and indeed it represents an expression of cultural heritage and a visualization of a region or country's history. We're all at different starting points with different complexions of infrastructure and capacity, making the need for a balanced mix of modern technologies all the more important, especially for renewables-ready heating technologies. The main challenge is to make this transition work for everyone in Europe, and there will be particular challenges for rural businesses and communities. As pointed out, 140 million EU citizens live in rural areas, including 40.7 million European households located in rural areas that are not connected to the gas grid. This means that 45% of rural homes are heated mainly from oil and coal. All that has to change over the next number of years, and we have to incentivise people to do that. In my own country, in Ireland, 70% of the rural housing stock use heating oil. Over 27% of these heating oil systems were installed before 2020 and therefore old and inefficient. So what's going to be done to change that? I think at European level, the renovation roadmaps for decarbonising European heating and cooling in buildings must pay particular attention to rural areas and include diversification of energy supply towards higher uptake of renewable energy sources, including efficient use of renewable gases, as Stefan was saying, where it makes more sense. And I think once we have the EPP done here at European level and adopted, what's really needed then is a follow-up at national level, so that if I own a house in rural Ireland, or somebody owns a house or a building in rural Europe, you not leave it up to themselves to try and find out what's the best way to decarbonise. There should be a roadmap, as we call it, or guidance, and saying, you have the following at the moment. You have an oil pump, or you have coal, or whatever. Now, the best for your house is A, B, or C. And I think that's key, because an awful lot of householders, if you ask them, would you like to decarbonise your building? They'd say yes. And then we'd say, do you want to do it? Yes. How? They'd say, I don't know. So they're waiting for that type of advice. And once we have that advice and then put in the measures to help it, especially the financial supports, and where possible linking to the grid, then I think we could make an awful lot of progress. So thank you, Mariam.
Well, I just wanted to follow up, Mr. Kelly, on what you just talked about. First of all, money, and then also the roadmap. And I think both are really important, and they need to follow up at a national level. With money, I think it's a case of changing mindsets, so that, you know, obviously these people, as you said, can be helped. You know, now one thing that I noticed that you have actually been talking about a lot, you've called for changes to CAP to allow farmers to sell unused electricity from solar power to help their income streams, decrease carbon footprint of farms, and help with rising energy costs. So are you seeing sort of any positive reaction or steps towards that, especially when you talk about, you know, local communities need to have this roadmap, and that needs to be more money put into these communities? So we have to change essentially the mindset of the people so that they can get the help they need.
Yeah, I have written to the Commission on it, and obviously this is something we'll be discussing at EPBD level with the rapporteurs, etc., and also, of course, with the DG Ag, because the situation has to be that if there is renewable energy being created, then if it's not being utilised in a particular farm, etc., they do need the opportunity to sell it onto the grid. Because if you look across Europe at the moment, especially in farms, there are massive sheds with great potential for solar PV, and that will have to be utilised. And particularly when we think of what Stefan was saying and yourself at the beginning, the result of the war in Ukraine. We just have to speed up the whole question of not relying on fossil fuels, particularly from Russia. So this is an opportunity to look at every single possible way to ensure that we decarbonise our building stock. And that will take a mixed technology approach, but it means utilising every opportunity. So there's no point in having a situation where large buildings, etc., sheds, have the potential to create electricity if we're not prepared to utilise that.
That's Ms. Berlin. When people, I mean, obviously we were just talking about farmers there with Sean Kelly, but there's a misconception when it comes to rural communities. When people think of them, they think instantly of farmers. But just because you don't live in a big city or a capital, it doesn't mean you are one. So give us a kind of sense of who make up these communities, what kind of people, what kind of businesses, and then what do you then see as their main challenges for this transformation?
A question for me, Marion?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I missed the beginning. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And indeed, I would absolutely agree with and concur with the statements of Sean Kelly, particularly on the Irish situation. I think I'd give you an example. In July 2020, we held what we thought would be a small event, managing to ask questions around people's willingness to undergo transition in a very rural area. And again, many of the attendees were non-farmers or people living in the villages and towns nearby. We held what we thought was going to be a small meeting in July of 2020. It was absolutely packed out with people asking very definitive questions. And Sean was asking them there a moment ago. What can we do was the bottom line that they were asking. And I think what was really missing, in the sense that we did try to answer them, we were doing it with our own resources. But what was really missing, I thought, at that meeting was a definitive national plan. And we held a European conference in Ireland only 2 weeks ago, and we found the same deficit across Europe. Each country has signed up to the major COP and all of those COPs, Scotland and all of the rest. But each national country has actually done nothing to prepare communities, people living in rural and even in urban areas as to what their options are. And we would say, you talked about finance, one of the things that came up, you know, some people live just in a house, they may have employment or they may not. Or even if they have employment, they still have a significant conversion to make, which could cost anywhere in the region of 50 to 80,000 euros. Now, there are obviously you need grants and you need supports, but no country can support totally with grants that kind of sum. So you need a system based on the various financial tools, such as either guaranteed loans, low interest loans, to assist along with the grants. You also need a technical specification in terms of what best suits each individual house. And many people do not know, for example, if gas is really suitable. They do not know if the solar power really suits them. They don't know whether wind really suits them. And each country we've asked for in Irish Rural Link should put together their own environmental conference where there is a strong sense of negotiation as to what suits the individual country, because each country is different. And so, Marianne, I would say there is a dearth of knowledge. And I would also point my fingers at the major suppliers of energy, irrespective of what area they come from, because certainly when we approach some of them to explain even their own best examples, they were rather reluctant to come. So there is a dearth of knowledge. People are asking, they're desperate to make the transition, to honour the changes signed up in the COP agreement. But on the ground, all they know is it costs in the region of 50 to 80,000 euro per household. And then I haven't even touched on the rural transport, which is another area where we have proposals. And that area needs to be resolved as well.
Okay, so Eva, your thoughts then, you know, from listening to all of you, you know, keywords, just roadmap, money, you know, the forgotten rural communities, the lack of public transport, they need support, they need financial aid or grants. But of course, all of this starts with access to information. So how would you say, or what would you say is key for mobilizing these communities?
Thank you, Mariam. I fully agree with what has just been said. I'm Polish, so maybe I bring a little bit more Polish example here. In Poland, there is a free initiative, Future of Rural Energy in Europe initiative, who ran actually a survey among the presidents and mayors of small cities and villages. And they actually believe that they're not really implementing the climate law to the extent they should be. And the problem is exactly the lack of co-financing possibilities, lack of individual subsidy programs. So there's a huge challenge there, definitely. But at the same time, I think there is a huge interest in investing into clean energies. We see a huge interest in renewable wind. We see a huge interest in solar wind, solar power or solar installations. And for instance, we also see a huge interest in gaseous fuels as a solution. Hence, what we need actually is to give this possibility to choose for those rural communities of that energy source that is really possible for them, because not every single village is not every single city that is off-grid is in the same situation. So having this technology neutrality, it's key. There is lots of solutions that deliver lower carbon. That they are lower carbon, so reduce the CO2 emissions or reduce air pollution, because it's also a huge topic that we haven't yet touched upon here, that are available. But for that, we need to make sure that we have that consumers, that people in rural areas have the flexibility to choose. And I fully agree that there is lack of understanding of which energy source is the best for you. I think a lot of people just choose the cheapest energy form, and we see that big move in Poland. It's an exceptional situation right now with the war in Ukraine, but we see that people are just terrified before the winter. The prices are going up. All prices across the board, including energy prices, but the fact that we might be facing a cuts in gas supply for the winter, that's also quite worrisome. Hence, allow all the technologies, allow all the solutions for those communities to be available. I think that's basically one of the key elements to the situation.
Absolutely, and there will be lots of worried families looking towards winter and wondering how they're going to be able to afford their energy. We are going to be losing our Irish MEP Sean Kelly because he has to go to another meeting. So Sean Kelly, if you please could take the floor and just give some final thoughts for us, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mariam. Sorry, I have another meeting in a few minutes. But I think this is hugely important. Number one, that we get the regulation right and have it all embracing, and particularly to allow for local generation, because that's going to be key in rural areas. It will also help to create jobs, etc. And as well as that, we must allow for all technologies that can be utilized most effectively in different parts. That includes biofuels, biomass, and of course the usual ones, wind, solar, etc. And I think the key then is going to be how we're going to follow up as Seamus was saying a few moments ago, that we need to give advice to people. And that's where our proposal for one-stop shops are going to be crucial for this to happen as soon as possible. And the financial aspect of it cannot be overstated. And in view of that, I put some proposals to the ECB, etc. I'm having a meeting with them this week so that we can take all that into account and feed it into our proposals, which will be finalised essentially by the end of this year. So we're moving along quickly. We hope we get a strong directive here that will cover all the angles, and then we'll make it not alone just ambitious, but also give the tools by which it will actually become a reality. And rural areas are going to be crucial for this. They have been somewhat forgotten maybe up until now, but they will be taking central stage from now on because of the figures which you pointed out in the beginning. So many people living there. If we want to decarbonise, we have to do it to all buildings. And also, of course, the opportunities that are there that need to be maximised. So my colleagues and I hopefully will include all that in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, facilitate a mixed technology approach, and to ensure that we get an effective outcome that will basically ensure that buildings, number one, that they can be insulated properly. That's going to be another key aspect before you start putting in heat pumps or whatever, but also that every single combination of technologies that are available would be available, and then the advice for people as to what would be best for their particular area. And then, of course, the financial incentives to make it happen, be it by way of grants, which are important, be it by way of low interest loans, or maybe by way of payback when you're making the savings. We have to look at all that, but it's exciting, and I think the will is there to do it right, and I'm looking forward to cooperating with you. And particularly, I would welcome any feedback from people before we finalise, because it's the stakeholders in particular, and those with experience, who can help us to get the best possible outcome, and that's what we want. So thank you very much, Mariam, and thanks to all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kelly. Thank you so much for being part of this debate. Okay, well, guys, let's keep moving forward then. I mean, we were just discussing, Eva was also talking about, winter supply, the fact that lots of people are worried, the Ukraine crisis. So Stefan Moser then, we're in an energy crisis, we're in a cost of living crisis. As a sort of general rule, rural buildings, whether they're private premises or business premises, often they're bigger per square foot than the average sort of townhouse or city building or establishment, and they are also older. So not everyone, especially in these rural areas, have a high level of income. So what are the solutions to help them with regards to renovation? A few of the panelists have been talking about national plans, but how does the European Commission perhaps fit in here to help sort of further those national plans and help people get the help in these rural communities to start renovating their businesses or individual premises?
Thanks a lot, Mariam. I can only also say that I fully agree with what Sean, Seamus, and Eva have said. I think we converge fully on the challenges, but also the tools to be used. So national plans means in the practical cooperation that you consult, that you take seriously the needs, but also the challenges which are there at the local level. So it requires a bottom-up approach. So basically, it requires that each community, each village, let's say, in a rural area, would actually be aware what buildings there are, what people need, what is the current situation, in order to then analyze what could be solutions. There's a distinction, of course, between the grid. Some villages are connected to the grid. The question is then, how strong is the grid? What would it cost to upgrade the grid? Then you have a completely different set of solutions. and of course the buildings which are off-grid, which are basically or linked to a very weak grid, which would be very costly to upgrade. And the same comes for the buildings. What buildings are there? How old are they? What are the solutions to these buildings? What are the useful purposes of that building? How they can be repurposed? You mentioned some of the buildings are very large because there were farms before. Often the farms have changed, or businesses are moving in rural communities which have different needs. So the question is indeed, how do we refurbish the building so that it becomes most useful to the people living there today? And then also what can be done to improve the energy performance of that particular building? What are the low-hanging fruits, for instance, which are not that costly but bring a huge effect? Much more than in urban areas where you have lots of, I would say, more standard buildings. In rural areas, you have often very unique buildings. Even a farmhouse can be very different depending on how old it is, what is the heritage component, and what can be done about that building. And then the question is, what would have to be the heated space of a building? You don't necessarily, if you live in a large building, need to heat the entire building. You can choose to somehow disconnect some part of the building for useful purposes which don't require heating. For instance, holiday destinations, or where you don't have tourists necessarily so much in the winter, and you would have then an unheated part of the building, which is somehow where you save energy, of course, by not heating, and the rest of the building which is heated. So it requires a really targeted approach. And then, of course, once you have done that, an analysis for each building in a rural community, how much does it cost to get there? You mentioned the low income of people. Absolutely. Many rural communities are vulnerable in terms of income. They have often also a volatile income. They can't necessarily count on a steady revenue because they don't know. It depends on the business they're running. And then public support has to come in. We have been saying that, but also ensuring as much as possible that from the European level we give the signal that the worst performing buildings with the vulnerable communities should be prioritized. We need to think social policy together with buildings policy. Buildings policy is energy and climate policy under the Green Deal. It's also energy security policy. And from that point of view, we all need to save energy. So I think improving and reducing the consumption of the building is absolutely key. So the energy efficiency component, but then also a strategic reflection, what actually needs to be heated in the building and what can be left unheated, for instance, if it's too large for today's users, for instance. And then, of course, the source of energy. So once we have done the refurbishment, improvement of the facade, the shell of the building, the roof, the windows, the leaky parts. In many old buildings, there are simply leaky parts where the wind blows through. Also in cities, of course, but of course, if a building is very old, this happens more frequently. So this can be closed at relatively low cost. You need an advisor who goes there and helps the people, saying, okay, I look at the building, I see the following weaknesses, this could be done about that. This is the idea which Sean Kelly just mentioned, one-stop shops. So you turn to one place and you get free advice, ideally free or very, very low cost advice, that you would get a full picture of what can be done. This is a cost-effective investment of society, because the cost of leaving it open and not doing that is much bigger. People don't know. They would then rather do nothing rather than investing in something where they're not sure. So it's a huge gain for qualified people to be, I would say, paid by the public, by the government, and help people go there, really, in particular when it's unique buildings and not standardized buildings. In urban areas, you have standardized buildings in many places. Of course, you have also unique buildings, heritage or not. But many buildings, either multi-apartment houses or terraced houses, etc., where you can have professional advice from from people who have done that before, where you have more or less a kind of package of solutions which have been tested and which can be applied with slight modifications for each building or each type of building. But this is less the case in rural areas. And then, as mentioned before, the supply of energy, that also requires a very specific and dedicated analysis. What is available? I think we pretty much concur that there's normally a very big solar energy potential in rural communities because there are large roofs. There may also be a wind energy potential for villages forming an energy community. Of course, there can be a gaseous potential, so to have biogas being used. Biogas can even be produced on the spot. So in many rural communities, there can be a producer at least who can deliver to people living there. And of course, you have also biomass, even the use of wood-based biomass, I mean, which is also produced very close by. So there are lots of solutions, and I think it requires this in-depth analysis for each community, what makes sense. Ideally, not everyone on their own, but rather systemically. So a village, what houses are there? Maybe 100 houses. What solutions do we find for these buildings? And that will also then reduce the cost of advice and allow for a systemic approach to the whole village rather than to each house. So this will be much more efficient and should be applied there as well.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. So lots of ideas and possible solutions for all communities there and what they could do with renovation projects. Eva, I mean, obviously, when it comes to rural communities, we're saying one size does not fit all. But what would your one advice be to somebody who is looking to renovate their sort of, you know, oversized house and to make it more sort of sustainable?
My advice would be, yes, please do it, because actually it brings a lot of benefits, financial in the long term, because you have your running costs later on much lower than previously, but also you improve your health. If you, for instance, want to change your heating system from heating oil to coal, from heating oil coal to gaseous fuels or PV, that would dramatically also improve the environment you're living in. So I think that general advice would be try to find out what type of loans are available for that, and educate yourself. And I think there are some advice, at least the industry has set up some sorts of advices to help making those decisions for individual households in rural areas. So that's available. Maybe needs to be scaled up, but it is still possible to find. And find advice what fits your house best. If you have a historic house, obviously you cannot install a PV on your rooftop, but maybe another solution would be adequate. LPGs, for instance, quite often used there as alternative solutions for heating, or installation of micro CHP, so micro cogeneration, which has heat and power at the same time. So there's a lot of interesting solutions available on the market, and they are affordable. So the upfront investments into that are not as high as you know. They can be still quite manageable, and they will offer you a much better quality of life. That would be my advice to those households.
Thank you. And Seamus, is renovation taking hold in your area? Do you have any examples of renovation projects? We could just detail a little bit of those.
Yes, there are examples. I know in Ireland we have one area, it's called the Leitrim Homes Renovation Cooperative, and they've managed to I think renovate something like, in a population of 25,000 in that particular area, something like over in the last couple of years 1,000 homes, and that's based on a community forming a kind of cooperative, which seeks to find the correct answers and manage to establish a company who would actually install and do the renovation, which would solve some of the issues around trying to find workers, etc. I think really what we've said in Irish Rural Link, now I wrote it in my chat box, but I don't know if it's got to anyone else. We've asked for, we're using the initials REAP, R-E-A-P, as the Rural Energy Action Plan. We believe that if each country would simply put together the Rural Energy Action Plan, which, if distilled downwards to the local communities, the towns, the village, would allow a situation, as Stefan and indeed Eva has said, bring the information to the households directly, so that any household can say, okay, I have a unique rural house. I have maybe some farm sheds. Maybe I have, some unique geographical perspective which could manage to create my own type of energy, and therefore I could work. But you need examples in terms of practices. You need situations where you've actually seen this happen before, and you need the expertise to bring it about. Equally, if you organize the same kind of energy cooperative in a local area, they could also look at the transport needs of that area, because they can be, it can be whatever is suitable in a particular area in terms of the transport needed, whether it's delivery, whether it's buses, whether it's simple transport of people. And the only way you can do that is to bring ordinary communities into the discussion, consult with them, make them part of it, make it easier to form local energy cooperatives, because we do have some local energy cooperatives in Ireland, not enough, and they do need to support. And I have to say that, it is up to the departments of finance to start devising what I call financial ways and means in order to bring this about. It's not that rural communities expect to be 100% funded for all of this. It's impossible, really. But what they can and should expect is the financial tools available, whether it's, as I said, local guaranteed loans, public banking loans, or whatever way it's done, in such a way that they are linked to the ability to pay back, etc. But all of this requires, as I said at the beginning, Miriam, a proper national action plan, or national energy action plan, to really give the tools to people and to the companies. But I would say companies could do a lot more. But certainly we haven't got that. It's too disjointed. It's too dependent on different initiatives, and it's too scattered. So we need to collect it and put it into, as I think Stefan said, the one-stop shop.
Okay, so you're talking there about, national plans and rural energy action plans. Before we go to audience questions, I wanted to have one last question with Stefan Moser. As Seamus was saying there, having national plans and rural action plans, but how can communities take one step forward when member states are taking 2 steps back? And we were speaking just before we went live about one new big challenge, Germany and also the Netherlands. They've decided to fire back up their coal plants as Russia, of course, throttles gas supply. So given that the European Commission obviously has this REPowerEU proposal, isn't it sort of embarrassing, not just for the European Commission, but the EU as a whole? And is there any action to be taken regarding member states who are going back towards fossil fuels?
Thank you, Mariam. I can only state again that how much I agree with what Seamus just mentioned now. I think the need for systematic planning, but not in the way that someone from the capital would say, that's your plan and now let's do it like that. And indeed, as Seamus said, work with the people in the local communities, and of course in the rural areas, in the rural communities, and identify the needs, objectives, and possibilities, opportunities, and work out basically solutions together. Only then such national territorial planning will be successful. In the EPBD, we have these building renovation plans, and we have, of course, also have the governance of the Energy Union with national energy and climate plans. So the quality of that plan is absolutely essential in the sense of being an acceptable and an agreed reference framework, and not just something which is written by a few informed officials in the capital, or even worse, some officials in Brussels writing it for the whole of Europe. This is not possible and would never be the objective. Then it will be successful and will be accepted also in the content by the local communities. So Mariam, as regards your question, I think REPowerEU is a call by the European Commission to accelerate and intensify the green energy transition for the benefits of energy security, to improve energy security, which has been dramatically put into jeopardy by Russia's horrible aggression against Ukraine. So I think is unquestioned by the member states, by any member state. The two member states which you mentioned, they are deeply committed to that. So they're deeply committed to the green energy transition. They do whatever they can, even and going beyond obligations, far beyond obligations in that respect. But in the case of Germany, for instance, as you mentioned, Germany and the Netherlands, as it happened also with other member states, there was indeed a role for natural gas in the energy transition while getting out of coal, and in the case of Germany, also nuclear energy. This has been changed dramatically by the events triggered by the Russian aggression. Therefore, we need to see how we get through the next winter. So the first objective, also for Germany, but for all member states, is to save energy, to see how we can save energy, because that's the idea of the EU Save Plan. Lots of member states are doing also national additional measures, campaigns, but also further action to save energy. That is necessary. Then the question is, what energy do we still need despite all the saving efforts and the accelerated deployment of renewable energy, solar energy, wind energy, geothermal, any other forms of renewable energy? But we will not cover the gap in case there would be a complete cut of natural gas by Russia, which is now, I would say, not excluded. The recent developments, even of the last few days, they point to I would say, a dramatic escalation of the issue. So it's not a de-escalation. We are moving towards an escalation of the threat. We have to face this. So the way to do that is to fill up the storages of gas. We need natural gas for a variety of purposes during the winter. For this, we need to fill up the storages, make them nearly full. Yeah? So there are different figures floating around. We will try to get as far as we can. At least 80 or even 90% should be filled. And we have to do whatever we can to fill them up. So not to use now natural gas while we don't absolutely need it for, I would say, survival in the winter. Now, when it's still warm, so where you don't need it for instance, heating, or where because we need it for various purposes. We need for heating, but also for industry. So the question is, what alternatives do we have in sectors which can also use other fuels? That includes, of course, in particular, the electric generation, so generation of electricity. And there, each member state has different options. Some member states have nuclear energy. Some member states have decided to move out of nuclear energy. So in some cases, there's now indeed the question, what else do we have? And that would then lead to coal being a kind of residual, relatively secure energy source, which we all agree and we all know that this is not something we should get back to. But in order to survive a winter or the following winters, we don't know how long this will take, there's no other way of doing that. So we have to accept that for the benefits of energy security, to maintain the essential functions of society and the economy, you may have to have an exception and go for something more polluting than otherwise you would have done. So this is actually what's happening in Germany, but also in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a very specific situation because they have decided for very specific national reasons to move out of gas because of the earthquake risks in the north of the Netherlands. But they still have to survive. They don't want to go back on that and say, let's have some more earthquakes and therefore use gas. So they look for the other solutions. They are both deeply committed to improving and accelerating the energy transition, to look for alternatives, renewable energy. But in the very short term, in a few months, you cannot do that. So you basically have to, in sometimes also resort then to polluting forms of energy. And I think that's the price to pay in this exceptional crisis scenario.
Okay, well, is this the price to pay for generations to come, Eva? Do you think that this needs-must approach is actually okay by Germany and the Netherlands and potentially other member states?
Well, it's as I mentioned, we are in a very exceptional situation right now with the war in Ukraine. Going back to coal in heating or other polluting energy sources is never a good choice. It has an impact on the health of citizens. First of all, as the emissions are really high from individual stoves when coal or wood or heating oil is used in them. So I wouldn't say that it's a sustainable solution at all. I think we do have sustainable solutions in heating, especially in off-grid areas, which I mentioned. The bio-LPG has extremely big environmental benefits over coal and heating oil, especially when it comes to all the pollutants, NOx, SOx, PM, all those things that actually cause lung cancers and heart diseases. All those pollutants can be eliminated by usage of cleaner fuels already today, which are already affordable. Now we are talking about the grand scale. We are talking about the big supplies. We are talking so what the countries like Germany and the Netherlands are doing from their perspective. It's about security of supply. So I will obviously leave that to always to the countries to decide on that. But it is not going in the direction that we are all heading into, which is having a cleaner environment for all. But at the same time, I just want to underline that the LPG sector is a very versatile sector. The LPG deliveries are from across the globe, so we are not that dependent on the Russian supplies. And we have full storages ahead for the winter. So when it comes to at least delivering safe and secure supplies to our consumer this winter, our industry is ready at this point.
Okay, lovely. Okay, well, listen, we have about 10 minutes left. So we're going to start with audience questions, but it's going to be very sort of rapid fire. So do try to keep your answers quite short, panelists. Okay, so first one from John Taylor. He says, will the EPBD allow someone to install a boiler in the next decade and beyond to use a renewable gas or a renewable liquid gas to heat their home or business? Stefan, perhaps you could take that one first.
Yes, thanks, Mariam. Definitely yes. It is, of course, an interplay between the EPBD and member state choices. So the EPBD is an instrument to encourage and accelerate the transition towards a higher energy performance, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. So I would say from that angle, renewable energy sources will always be fine. The question is, of course, how exactly member states will shape their priorities. We have included in the EPBD an empowerment for member states and a clarification for member states to ban fossil fuel-based solutions for heating and cooling. Yeah? So and to stop and now accelerate the phase out of financing to fossil fuel-based heating and cooling. but that's fossil fuel based. That's the policy objective. So renewable sources are not part of that. And I think we should always allow for a mix of technologies, technological neutrality. And but it's of course for member states to decide how they would like to promote, for instance, different types of technologies. That actually is in line then with the national plans to be worked out with stakeholders bottom up. What are the opportunities in the territory? What are the respective availabilities of, for instance, renewable gases, renewable liquids, renewable biomass more broadly, and how much of that is there? Because as much as I agree, for instance, with EVA, that your industry stands ready to supply for local communities, but this is a kind of, I would say, residual form of energy, which can help a lot in certain communities, but it's of course not a major, I would say, solution to the entire nation. There's simply not enough of it. So if it's of renewable energy origin, fossil fuels is another thing. There we need to get out, that's clear. But if you look at renewable sources, we have a very limited amount of that energy available. And that's something for the member states to work out, how much of each renewable source is available and where it should be used.
Okay, we have another question. It's from Gohar Rahman. It's actually directed to Stefan, but I'm going to go to Eva with this one. Gohar says, should the EPBD be amended to offer the flexibility to use off-site solutions, including renewable liquid gas, to achieve zero emissions for buildings not connected to the grid? Eva?
Thank you for this question. I think the on-site generation is a little bit of a showstopper, let's say, for any other types of renewable solutions that could be used in rural communities, and currently the text says so. But this question is indeed, I think, more for Stefan, whether there is a possibility still to amend this. From our perspective, indeed, if we can extend this not only to on-site generation, but to recognize that other gaseous fuels, including biogas, bio-LPG, renewable DME, that they can also be included in this solution.
Okay, Seamus, there's a question from Mike Parr. He says he's developing a rural community energy scheme. The main problem is not money. He says we can raise that. The problem is the electricity distribution company. And he says it's a regulatory failure. Any thoughts on that?
Sorry, Mark. You broke up a little bit in asking that question. Could you just repeat it? I just missed a little bit of it.
No worries. So Mike says he's developing a rural community energy scheme. The main problem is not money. He has that, or they have that. The problem is the electricity distribution company. And he says it's a regulatory failure. So what advice would you have for Mike?
Yeah, well, that's the problem he is alluding to, is effectively it may be the dominance of the distribution company, and perhaps they don't want to change, I suppose, habits of a lifetime. They've been distributing the electricity in a certain way, and they don't want to change that, and I'm assuming that's the case. This is, unfortunately, like it or not, we do need the kind of legislation to ensure that they can be a lot more flexible, and that there are better opportunities for Mike to get involved in, which is why I am proposing the Rural Energy Action Plan as a basis to iron out these problems, because sometimes the enemy is the old structures that were there that people don't want to change, especially the companies involved. It does require legislation, and it does require, as I said, a Rural Energy Action Plan.
And Seamus, I'll stick with you for the next question. It's also from Mike, and he's talking about community energy. And this sort of, goes hand in hand with a question that I had, which was, could community ownership help really fast track the application of the EPBD in rural communities? So having better rural coalitions, associations, power to the local governments and agencies to accelerate any sort of partnerships and enterprise?
Well, firstly, the answer in terms of does it fast track and does it help? Of course it does. It's been proven time and time again when communities form, whether it's cooperatives or simply community organizations, to do anything. I mean, rural water schemes exist all over, I think, the continent. They were devised and developed by local rural communities and cooperatives. They do need the overarching protection of legislation, of course. They do need as it were, the goodwill of government, or the government that exists. And if they have that, then they will do it. The great advantage of a local rural action group, whether it's a cooperative or whatever way they form, is that you will have complete buy-in from everybody in that area, because everybody in that area will have had a say in developing the plans, will have had a say in even organizing how those plans are implemented. And the implementation is just as important as even the development. So again, it does need leadership at a national basis, but once that leadership is given, then you hand it over to the local communities to do that and give them the tools in order to develop and implement the programs.
Okay, Stefan, question for you now from Sebastian. He's talking about European level financial incentive plans to support communities and rural actors in the EPBD energy transition. And this was also something I also wanted to ask you about, whether you think the European Commission is doing enough with this revision to really meet the mountain of the task that there is, and where will the money potentially come from to boost the renovation or these complete rebuild in rural areas? And just one other thing is that rural development, from what I understand, it falls under CAP right now. I know there's also the new, social climate fund, which is mobilizing 72 odd billion. But where's the money going to come from, Stefan?
Well, I think what is important is to see that financing and financing advice should actually also go through the one-stop shop. So for the citizens, including in rural communities, there should be a very easy to understand guide where you can get the money from and whom to talk to, how to apply. And there should not be a distinction between either European money or national money or international money from other donors, for instance, and of course also private financing. Yeah, so which is facilitated and where conditions have been improved thanks possibly to guarantees and reducing the risks. So that's absolutely crucial. But there are, of course, European sources which have to be combined with national sources and private sources. The money from the European level comes from the structural funds, cohesion policy funds, including, of course, rural development funds, but also the regional policy funds, and the recovery and resilience funding, which is very important, which can be used to a very large degree to increasing the energy performance of buildings and renewable energy more broadly by stimulating economic activity that basically were born out of the coronavirus crisis, which now seems, of course, a long way down the road with all the other new challenges which we are facing. But still, the money which is still available can be, and the money which has been already used has been made available for those purposes. But it will not be enough. It will have to be combined with national state aid, national subsidies. We have always argued that there's a very strong public interest component, public good component of helping to invest. This is not basically wasted money. It's investing in the value and of buildings and the wealth of citizens and of the whole country, because we need these investments to save actually expenditure on fossil fuels. Yeah? So, and to strengthen our economies. So it basically is not a loss in value. It is an investment to improve the economic and social well-being of our societies. So that actually justifies even more that we invest from the public side and see it really as money not being lost, but preserved for future generations. Even if, of course, sometimes we are in a liquidity challenge and financing challenge. now with interest rates rising again. So this is not easy, but it has to be tackled. And I think what is crucial is that we need to collectively ensure continuity and predictability of financing. This is a long-term challenge for decades to come. It will not be done in a few years. We have to make sure that for each new government at a national level, but also for the European Union, when developing a new multi-annual financial framework, in this case now as of 2027, there will be continuity of financing, not reducing the volumes, and make sure that the priorities will still be served. But that's something which we really have to work hard on, that this is maintained, and that each member state and the EU keep that in mind. Working very close together with the important financial institutions, the European Investment Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development for some of our member states and neighboring countries, and of course the EU financing itself and the member state finance, to bring that together. But I think it's impossible for citizens to understand that. It's not even necessary, because at the recipient end, I would say, it requires that the financing is brought together in accessible and understandable financial instruments, which citizens can use by simply making a request to ask, I need so and so much, that's my investment, I need this financing volume, can you help, how do I get it? And that some professional advisor actually helps you asking for it. Otherwise it would not happen. People would simply lose confidence or simply get lost. Yeah? So including people like myself, I mean, I'm involved in policymaking, but as a citizen, of course, I'm also confronted with the complexity of life, and including in a renovation, I think you need advice from people who are doing that all the time, who know to reduce the information costs, the transaction costs. That someone says, I've done it 25 times already this week, so thanks, here is your request. Are you okay? Does it meet your challenges? Sign here, and then it's gone. So it has to be so that easy as part of the one-stop shop advice or energy advisors basically being active, that people can use it and have sufficient confidence to using it.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. I think that advice, especially you know, what you said about financing, are definitely key takeaways for people who have been watching the debate. Okay, we've run out of time. So what I would say, the key takeaways, if you've been watching, we've talked about choice, we've talked about clean energy, we've talked about a mixed technology approach, having a roadmap, money, as Stefan was pointing out there, information, consultation of communities, changing mindset, especially of the people in charge, and to ensure that there is planning in place, especially when we talk about, you know, winter months, and not just this winter, but planning for the future. Okay, so we're going to have to leave it there. I hope everyone has enjoyed this debate. Thank you to Stefan Moser, MEP Sean Kelly, Seamus Boland, and Ewa Abramic-Lete. Thank you all so much for being part of this discussion. And to everyone who's been watching online, I hope that what you've seen has given you a flavour of the debate surrounding energy performance and buildings directive, and how it could be really and you've been watching a debate with Liquid Gas Europe in partnership with Directive. Take care and bye-bye.